A fuel barge sat beside a minesweeper, pumping fuel oil into the vessel so she could return to her work. It was a warm day in the Solomon Islands, and everyone was consistently on guard, being that it was in the middle of a war zone. Just as the day seemed it would be uneventful, the whirring of aircraft overhead changed the mood drastically. The Japanese had arrived, and they were there to wreak havoc upon the Allied forces. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. Thank you to our lovely members for voting on this ship and for the idea to cover her in the first place. This is our first New Zealand military ship, and our first minesweeper. If you want to hear more about minesweepers, make sure to check out our Fast Facts Friday episode from this week. Without any further ado, let's get into the Moa. Moa was the first of 3 bird-class naval trawler minesweepers, later referred to as corvettes. The other 2 were Kiwi and Tui, and all 3 were named after New Zealand native bird species. With growing tensions around the world in late 1939, the New Zealand government contracted Henry Robb Limited, a Scottish shipbuilding firm, to build the 3 naval trawlers for the New Zealand division of the Royal Navy. These ships were intended originally for training naval personnel in seamanship, gunnery skills, and minesweeping work. Because Henry Robb Limited had already built the 2 minesweeping trawlers HMS Bassett in 1935 and HMS Mastiff in 1938, they had experience, and this influenced the bird-class ships. They were similar in appearance to the later Isles class that drew inspiration from Bassett and Mastiff, but the bird class had an extended forecastle. They were slightly larger, more powerful than the Isles-class ships, and were referred to as corvettes by 1943 in official reports to the New Zealand Parliament. The bird-class ships were Moa, Kiwi, and Tui, designated yard numbers 314 to 316, and were all laid down together on March 19, 1940, and sponsored by Lady Ferguson, wife of former Governor-General Sir Charles Ferguson. Moa was launched on April 15th of that year and completed on August 19, 1941, being commissioned into the Royal Navy a week earlier on August 12th of that year. Kiwi was completed on October 28th and Tui was completed on December 5th. They were all commissioned directly into the Royal New Zealand Navy, which was formed on October 1st, 1941. Before we get any further into Moa's story, let's look at her specs. HMNZS Moa was a minesweeping naval trawler that displaced 607 tons standard and 923 tons at full load. She was 168 feet long overall, 157.5 feet long at the keel, and had a beam of 30 feet wide and a draft of 15.3 feet deep. She had a crew of between 33 and 35 personnel, though this did increase throughout the war as the ship was upgraded. As for propulsion, she was equipped with a single-shaft reciprocating steam engine that burned oil, providing a top speed of 13 knots at 1,100 indicated horsepower. As for armament, she had a 4-inch Mark 9 naval gun, supplemented with 2 quick-firing 3-pounder Hotchkiss guns and 1 twin-mounted Lewis machine gun. She also had ASDIC sonar radar and 40 depth charges for anti-submarine operations. She was not heavily armored, but she was ready to hit the high seas. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comments section below. Okay, let's look at her service history. Moa was one of the first 2 vessels with this name to serve in the Royal New Zealand Navy when she was commissioned on August 12, 1941. Upon commissioning, Moa and her sister ships each worked up in Scotland before being dispatched to New Zealand, with the first leg of their work being a North Atlantic crossing as part of an escort to a convoy. They steamed through the Panama Canal to the west coast of the United States and then crossed the Pacific Ocean with stops at various islands along the way. Upon arrival in New Zealand, starting in April of 1942 with Moa and ending in August with Tui, the minesweepers all joined the 25th Minesweeping Flotilla. Kiwi's transit resulted in some damage and she had to be repaired in Boston, Massachusetts along the way. Moa and the rest of the flotilla was offered for service in the South Pacific, and the offer was accepted by Vice Admiral Robert L. Gormley of the United States Navy, the commander of South Pacific operations. Moa and her flotilla then began to operate in the Solomon Islands, conducting anti-submarine operations and carrying out escort missions starting in December of 1942. While they were there, they disrupted Japanese supply efforts, destroying a number of landing barges. Since Moa and her sisters were considered quite weak against aircraft, they were unofficially upgunned with a 0.8-inch or Lycan guns scrounged from wrecked ships. Moving into 1943, on January 29th, Moa and her sister ship Kiwi helped to ram and wreck the Japanese submarine I-1. At the time, Moa was under the command of Lieutenant Commander Peter Phipps, later to become a vice admiral. Despite the heavy rain squall, Kiwi and Moa successfully detected the submarine and took turns ramming the submarine. I-1 ran hard aground on Fish Reef off the coast of Guadalcanal. The entire after half of her hull flooded, and she began to heavily list to starboard. 66 men abandoned ship, and not long afterward, I-1 sank, with 27 lost with the submarine. The two minesweepers emerged victorious and returned to duty, Kiwi after repairs at Auckland. In February of 1943, Moa participated in Operation Clean Slate, the occupation of the Russell Islands, which had been taken over by the Japanese. However, when the Moa put her forces ashore, the local natives informed them that the Japanese had already cleared out 10 days prior. It turned out to be an unnecessary operation, but at least they knew the natives were safe from the Japanese. So far, these minesweepers had proved their worth. And our members are worth their weight in gold. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Alright my friends, it's time to get into her sinking. On April 7, 1943, Moa sat in Tulagi Harbor at the small island of Tulagi in the Solomon Islands. There she was refueling from the USS Erskine M. Phelps. The water was bright, warm, and clear, and the day was like any other normal day in a war zone. Before long, aircraft launched from the Japanese carrier Hyo and the light carrier Zuiho as part of the Japanese Operation I-Go and land-based aerial offensive against Allied bases in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea swept in. Japanese aircraft swarmed in like angry hornets, dropping bombs toward Moa. The ship sustained 2 near misses and 2 direct hits from 500-pound bombs, one that passed through the ship before exploding in the water abeam to starboard, the other passed through the captain's cabin and into the boiler room, setting off a massive explosion and causing Moa to break back. Moa sank bow first in just 4 short minutes. In the sinking, 5 ratings were killed, 7 were wounded including Phipps, and the rest escaped unscathed. Remember that 0.8-inch Orlikon anti-aircraft gun on her very bow? The crew used this gun against her attackers before the ship sank. This gun could still be seen on her wreck in 2002. Moa wasn't the only ship sunk that day, with USS Aaron Ward and the oil tanker Kanawha being lost, and another transport and another tanker were damaged. Rest in peace to all of them. Her wreck sat undisturbed until 1975 when a typhoon hit the area, and a fishing boat moored at Tulagi dragged its anchor across the deck of the ship, destroying the superstructure. The debris field from the 1975 anchor incident remains scattered along the nearby seafloor, and the Moa is dived by Tulagi Dive, but due to higher silt concentrations, it is not visited often. All her depth charge racks and her 4-inch gun remain visible. 71 years after her sinking in 2014, Moa's nameplate was recovered by divers and is being restored for eventual display at the Torpedo Bay Navy Museum in Auckland, New Zealand. The Torpedo Bay Naval Museum already has on display the main deck gun recovered from the wreck of the I-1, the submarine sunk by Moa and her sister Kiwi. Kiwi and Tui would both survive World War II, being recommissioned as training vessels after the war, and being used to prepare men for service in the Korean War through the 1950s. Kiwi was scrapped in 1964, and Tui had her armament removed and served as an oceanographic research ship until her scrapping in 1969, thus leading to the end of the bird-class minesweepers. While minesweepers like Moa worked hard to clear the ocean of dangerous mines and protect other ships and their crew, mine layers were also hard at work, throwing deadly sea mines into the ocean to await their targets. The mine layer Okinoshima was one of these deadly mine layers of World War II, but she'd meet a terrible fate in St. George's Channel. Next week on Shipwreck Sunday, we'll explore her story.